As far as I can remember, my parents never seemed to show much interest in me. They would always be busy with their work, and whenever they did have time, they would always spend it with my sister. I never really understood why, but it was clear that they favored her over me. I tried my best to make them notice me. I would get good grades, try out for sports teams, and participate in school activities, but they would never seem to care. They would always find some excuse to miss my games or events, and I would end up feeling disappointed and hurt. On the other hand, my sister was the apple of their eye. They would always dote on her, ask her about her day, and take her out for special treats. She was the golden child, and I was the black sheep. Despite all of this, my sister and I had a decent relationship. We weren't particularly close, but we didn't fight or argue either. She seemed to understand that our parents favored her over me, but she didn't let that come between us. As for my sister's relationship with our parents, it was perfect. They would always go out of their way to make her happy, buying her expensive gifts, taking her on trips, and throwing her elaborate parties. They would listen to her problems, offer her advice, and support her in everything she did. It was clear that they loved her deeply and that she was their favorite child. I couldn't help but feel envious of her. It wasn't her fault that our parents loved her more, but it still hurt. And so when her birthday came around and they gave her an amazing celebration, I couldn't help but feel bitter. I knew they would never do the same for me, and it made me resentful. My birthday was a month before my sister's, but my parents didn't seem to care. They didn't plan anything special, didn't buy me any gifts, and didn't even wish me a happy birthday. It was like any other day, and I felt invisible. I didn't say anything to them about it, but the hurt and disappointment were real. I couldn't understand why they would go all out for my sister and ignore me completely. It wasn't fair, but I knew there was nothing I could do about it. Then, on the day of my birthday, they gave me a gift. It was a small box wrapped in colorful paper, and I was excited to see what was inside. But when I opened it, I was greeted with a joke box. It was filled with fake spiders, plastic vomit, and other silly pranks. At first, I thought it was a mistake. Maybe they had gotten me the wrong gift or were playing a joke on me. But as I looked at their faces, I realized it was intentional. They had given me a joke gift to mock me, to show me that they didn't care about my birthday or me. It was like a slap in the face, and I felt humiliated. I didn't know what to say or do, so I just sat there pretending to laugh along with them. But inside, I was seething. How could they treat me like this? How could they be so cruel? That gift was like a symbol of our entire relationship. They never showed me any love or affection, never acknowledged my achievements, and never cared about my feelings. I was the forgotten child, the one they didn't want, and the joke box was just another reminder of that fact. After that awful birthday, I felt like things couldn't get any worse. But when my sister's birthday rolled around, I found myself in an even more difficult situation. My parents went all out for her, just like they always did. They took her to her favorite restaurant, bought her expensive gifts, and threw her a huge party with all her friends. I couldn't help but feel bitter and resentful as I watched her having the time of her life. But what made it even harder was how my sister acted around me. She seemed to sense the tension and awkwardness in the air, and she tried to make things better by giving me a card. It was a simple gesture, but it meant a lot to me. It was like she was saying, I know things aren't fair, but I still care about you. But my parents didn't seem to notice. They were too focused on my sister and how wonderful she was. They praised her for making the card, telling her how thoughtful and mature she was. They beamed with pride as they looked at her, and it was like I didn't even exist. It was like they were living in a different world, a world where my sister was the perfect daughter and I didn't matter. And it hurt so much to see them treating her like a queen while I was just a joke to them. As the night went on, my bitterness grew and grew. I couldn't stand the sight of my parents doting on my sister and ignoring me. I felt a seething anger inside of me as I watched my sister's friends fawn over her, telling her how amazing the party was and how lucky she was to have such great parents. They had no idea what it was like to be the forgotten child, to be the one who always got the short end of the stick. I couldn't take it anymore. I stormed over to the stage where my sister was sitting and grabbed the microphone. She looked at me in confusion and tried to take it back, but I held onto it tightly. I knew what I had to do. I had to tell everyone what was really going on. I had to expose my parents for the hypocrites they were. I looked out at the crowd of people, some of whom were my sister's closest friends, and took a deep breath. "I'm sorry to ruin the party, but I have something I need to say," I began, my voice shaking with emotion. "You see, my parents gave my sister an amazing birthday celebration, and I'm sure she deserves it. But what you don't know is that they gave me a joke box for my birthday. They never show me any love or affection, never acknowledge my achievements, and never care about my feelings. I'm the forgotten child, the one they don't want, and the joke box was just another reminder of that fact." The room was silent. Everyone was staring at me, some with pity and some with horror. My sister looked like she wanted to crawl under a rock and disappear. "But that's not the worst of it," I continued, my voice rising. "They didn't just give her one party, they gave her two parties. They threw a huge gathering with all our family members and then sent me to a friend's house as if they couldn't be bothered to celebrate with me themselves." I could feel my anger boiling over. "And now they're throwing my sister this second huge party, acting like she's the perfect daughter and I don't matter. It's like they're living in a different world, a world where my sister is the queen and I'm just a joke to them." Tears were streaming down my face by this point, but I didn't care. I had to get this out. I had to make them see the truth. "Maybe you all think I'm just being dramatic or attention-seeking," I said, my voice breaking. "But I can't help the way I feel. I can't help that I'm hurt, angry and resentful, and I can't keep pretending that everything's okay when it's not." I could see the horror on my parents' faces. They looked like they had been caught in a trap, like they had been exposed for the terrible parents they were. My sister looked at me with tears in her eyes, and I knew that I had ruined her birthday. But I didn't care. I had finally said what I had been holding inside for so long. My parents, on the other hand, looked like they wanted to disappear. They didn't say anything, didn't try to defend themselves or apologize. They just stood there looking guilty and ashamed. As I stood there on the stage, I could feel the eyes of my sister's friends and family members staring at me. They were all silent, no one daring to speak or move. After a few moments, my sister's friends slowly started to gather their things and leave the party. I could see the anger and disappointment on their faces as they passed by me, giving me dirty looks. The rest of the family members followed suit, all of them ashamed of my parents' behavior. They didn't even bother saying goodbye. They just walked out the door with their heads down. I could hear the whispers and rumors as they left, and I knew that everyone was talking about what I had just done. But then my grandmother called out to me, her voice soft and gentle. She asked me to come and stay with her from now on, and I could feel the tears welling up in my eyes. It was the first time anyone had shown me any kind of affection in a long time. As I made my way over to her, I could hear my parents talking to my sister and her friends. They didn't even acknowledge me or try to apologize for what they had done. Instead, they just stood there trying to save their reputation. But then, something unexpected happened. My parents' own siblings started to speak up, telling them that they didn't deserve to have a daughter like me. My aunt and uncle spoke of how they had always seen the way my parents treated me differently and how it was not okay. My cousins nodded along in agreement. It was like a dam had burst, and everyone had finally let out all of their feelings towards my parents. They didn't defend themselves or try to make excuses. They just stood there taking it all in. As I sat with my grandmother, I could hear the shouting and arguing coming from the other side. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like I had a voice. I had spoken up for myself, and it felt liberating. Update 1. A few days later. Eventually, my parents came over to my grandmother's house looking defeated and tired. They didn't say anything to me, just nodded their heads in acknowledgement. I could see the shame and regret on their faces, but it was too little, too late. As I watched my parents sit down in front of my grandmother, I could feel the tension in the air. My grandmother had always been my biggest supporter, and I knew that she would not let my parents off the hook easily. "So what do you have to say for yourselves?" she asked, her voice stern and unwavering. My parents looked at each other, then down at the ground, unable to meet my grandmother's gaze. "We're sorry," my father finally muttered, his voice barely audible. My grandmother scoffed. "Sorry? Is that all you have to say for treating your own daughter so poorly?" My mother spoke up, her voice shaking. She said that they didn't mean to hurt me, that they just didn't know how to show me how much they cared. My grandmother rolled her eyes. She told them that they could have just started by treating me equally to my sister. She yelled at them that giving me a joke box on my birthday while lavishing their other daughter with attention was not exactly a way to show love. My parents hung their heads in shame, unable to argue with my grandmother's words. My father said quietly that he knows they messed up, but he wants to make things right. My mom said that they want to show me that they love me and care about me. My grandmother eyed them skeptically. "Words are easy. Actions are what matter. You have a lot of work to do if you want to earn back her trust and love." I could see my parents nodding in agreement. It was a bittersweet victory, but it was a victory nonetheless. I knew that things would never be the same between me and my family, but at least now they knew the truth. NTA. It's not acceptable for parents to show such blatant favoritism towards one child over another. Though it wasn't her sister's fault, these type of people need to be called out publicly. I completely sympathize with OP. It's heartbreaking to see how her parents treated her and how they clearly showed favoritism towards her sister. She deserved to be treated with love and respect just as much as her sister did. NTA, call out those narcissists. Next story. Last year, my husband, 35 male, and I, 34 female, had our first and last child. We were fortunate enough to be able to stay at home with him for almost a year by staggering our parental leave and vacations. But now that time has run out and we must return to work, I asked my mother, 56 female, if she would be available to watch him during the week, and she said no. Fair enough. That's her prerogative. My husband and I researched daycares in the areas where we work and settled on one that came highly recommended. It was expensive, though, and that meant cutting down on expenses, like the monthly allowance that we'd been giving my mother. A bit of background to this. My parents were married for 28 years before my father decided that he wanted someone younger and sexier than my mother. For all of those 28 years, my mother had been a stay-at-home mom, then stay-at-home wife. With my father leaving, she was now meant to survive somehow in a world where she had never really worked, because when they got married, my father didn't want her to, and because she was raised in a traditional religious family, she did what the head of the household wanted. I'm not even going to go into that man's hypocrisy. Either way, he's gone, and even though she got some alimony, she didn't press for as much as she should have. Again, that religious conditioning. And she's struggling. My husband and I have been supplementing my mother's income to a hefty amount every month which was not an issue until we had to put the baby into daycare and found out just how expensive that was in a VHCOL area. In light of that, we told her that we would need to cut her allowance in half. We were not planning to start immediately, but would take the financial hit for 3 months to give her time to adjust and move things around. She got upset and told us that we were punishing her for saying no. I told her that was not the case, but it is hard to maintain 2 households virtually by ourselves if we had to pay an exorbitant amount of our salaries to daycare every month for the foreseeable future. She was still angry and asked us to leave. Later, my sister called us upset that we were abandoning Mom and making her struggle just because she wouldn't do our bidding. So I suggested to her that she increase how much she was helping, considering she still lives at home. She called me a fricking bitch and hung up on me. So, Reddit hive mind, am I really TA here? ETA. I wanted to answer some reoccurring questions here. My sister's ability to help is limited and sporadic because she struggles with mental illness. It got much worse in recent years and we're working to get her on disability, but that is a process. I guess that's why I feel bad about the comment I made to my sister, because it was a moment of lashing out when I know that she's in a tough spot through no fault of her own. As for my mom, I still work with her to make sure that she can go back to work, especially given my sister's challenges. My mother is neither lazy nor a leech. Unfortunately, she's been beaten down by being raised in a traditional culture and having it drilled into her what the duty of a wife is. She was then betrayed by everyone when her husband left. NTA, you're not punishing her for saying no. You are being exceedingly generous to give your mother an allowance in the first place, but it's not your responsibility. If you can't afford it, you can't afford it, and you're still being exceedingly generous to give her half. And if your sister isn't paying at least half of your mom's household expenses, mortgage, food, utilities, etc., then she's got nothing to say in the matter. NTA, you have a small family to take care of. Your mom, at 56, still has plenty of time in which to work. While she might not get a high-paying job, she could still get something unskilled if she chose. Many employers take into account things like, I spent my life raising my kids. That said, knowing nothing else about your sister's situation, it's hard to make a call on her behavior. Next story. I had a son 18 years ago. My husband at the time pressured me into having a child despite knowing that I never wanted children. He then passed away in an accident and I was left alone with a child that I knew I could never care for like he deserved. I gave him up when he was a year old. I've tried my best to not think about him and have been living. I remarried and I'm all right. Well, he recently reached out and made it very clear he wasn't interested in a relationship. We met at a restaurant and he seemed very defensive and there was quite a lot of tension. He asked me a couple of questions about certain mental illnesses running in the family, and I answered all of them. While I was getting ready to leave, I asked him if he goes to college, university, just to get rid of some tension. He said he does, and he even got a volleyball scholarship. I was a volleyball player too and got a scholarship for the same school. I told him what I mentioned, calling it a cool coincidence. He rolled his eyes at me and said, "It isn't a coincidence if you're my biological mother." I didn't know what to say to that. He continued, "What? Is it too much for you to handle? I'm sorry for having something in common with you, my actual mother. My bad for being born." I said I was sorry, but he kept rolling his eyes. I began to feel overwhelmed, and I know this isn't fair for me to say, but he was beginning to remind me of his father, and I ended up saying, "Look, I'm sorry, but I never wanted to be a mother. You're allowed to be angry, but please understand that I was forced into having a child I never wanted." He went, "Way to play the victim," before storming off. Safe to say, I feel terrible. The only people who know about this are my mother and sister, and they even said that I was only thinking about myself at that moment, and I shouldn't have brought up anything and just answered his questions. They said that I made it about myself, when it's clear that the kid was having a hard time facing me already. My sister even implied that I was a little self-centered. Maybe this isn't the best place to ask, but I'm too ashamed to talk about this to anyone else. My sister also said it wouldn't hurt. AITA? Stay tuned for more stories from our girl relationships.